Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me?
I can.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for our Youth Development Capacity Building Collaborative Invitation to Negotiate Bidders Conference. I am Christy Goldwire, the Director of Program Operations here at the Trust. Also, we have other programs, department team members here, Dion Carruthers, who's a contract manager, as well as Belita James, who also serves as a contract manager for the Trust. Our Bidders Conference will be facilitated by Anna Delernia, and I am going to allow her to introduce herself as well as her team, and then take it away from there.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Good morning, everybody. This is Anna Delernia. I'm a consultant with the Children's Trust of Alachua County. And I also have my team member, Stephanie Maestri, here. So if you want to wave, Stephanie. Well, welcome to today. We're very excited to have you here for the Bidders Conference. I'm just going to present my screen. Can everybody see it? Just want to make sure. See? Yes, my screen. Yes, perfect. All right, so today, as Chrissy mentioned, today is being recorded and we will have the recording and PowerPoint available. Feel free during this discussion to, raise your hand and ask questions, or also put your questions in the chat. All of today's questions will also be compiled and posted as part of the ITN information on the Trust website. So what are we going to go over? So today's agenda is all about what this solicitation will be. So we'll go over a quick welcome and introduction, some background, the funding overview, purpose and goals, the scope, evaluation criteria, the review process, and the Q&A process, as well as details on how to apply, including all of the forms and attachments that are required as part of the application. So just so everybody is on the same page, all of the information that I will be going over today is included in the Children's Trust ITN for this capacity building funding. And so just in case you didn't know how to get there, here's the Children's Trust website. And if you go to the bids and RFP section, this is currently open and it's ITN 2022-01 Youth Development Capacity Building. So if you click on this, it has all of the information, including the schedule and all of the documents and forms that you need as part of the application process. So this is the best place to go. And this is also the place where the recordings will be posted and where the question and answers will be posted. So please make yourself familiar with this section of the Children's Trust website. So just now to give you some background on the collaborative, all of you, I believe, have seen this before and have been part of the collaborative already that I see from the chat. But for those who might not be familiar, so the Children's Trust in September of this year announced the start of the Youth Development Capacity Building Collaborative, and it opened applications to any eligible out-of-school time providers serving children in the K through 12th grade across the county. The point of the collaborative was to provide access to free trainings to improve organizational capacity, support providers with capacity building funding and implementation, which this funding is specifically geared towards the collaborative, and also to convene providers who are working in out of school time so that we can share best practices and coordinate services so that we can do that system building work across the county. So additionally, so in September, we had 47 organizations apply to be part of the collaborative. Again, there was no funding tied to the collaborative, but we had an application process for people who were interested in joining. In order to join, you had to be qualified to conduct business in the state of Florida, must not be a Alachua County public school or charter school, must have experience working with out of school time youth, and have plans to offer your services either in after school this current school year or summer of 2022. So these are people who are doing the work in out of school time. Additionally, after all of you joined the collaborative, the trust hosted a number of free trainings dedicated to supporting the capacity building. So October 13th, we had just an overview of what the collaborative is and also doing business with the trust. Went over some just key information about how the Children's Trust of Alachua County tends to do its contracting and solicitations. We also had training from the Florida After School Network on best practices and standards. We had from the Early Learning Coalition, the School Readiness Voucher Program, and how other organizations can leverage this Early Learning Coalition for additional funding. DCF licensing was also given on October 27th. So many of you I know attended the DCF licensing training. And that was all about, what the requirements are and why you would need your DCF license. And then we also hosted a part 2 of Florida After School Network as well. So a key part of this solicitation includes the training requirements that were already covered in the Youth Development Collaborative. All right, so now what's this funding look like? So very excited to say that we had the board approved $300,000 for approved direct and indirect costs for implementing capacity building plans, which the contract year would be starting January 1st through August 31st, 2022. This is an invitation to negotiate, so which is abbreviated as an ITN. An ITN is used so that we can, we don't have a set list of what we want to procure. So an invitation to negotiate allows a lot more flexibility in the capacity building plans and also the budgets. So this is why an ITN is used versus what many of you might be familiar with, which is an RFP process. So the purpose of this ITN is to provide the capacity building plans that focus on increasing program access, program quality, and organizational readiness for future CTAC funding. We are heavily utilizing the Florida After School Network standards to build those capacity building plans, as well as the things that would help support additional capacity, such as your DCF license or your ELC contracting. So the goal of the ITN specifically will be to help providers to improve program quality, expand access to safe and enriching out-of-school time programming for children from low-income families living in Alachua County. We also want to help organizations build their capacity to meet or exceed existing requirements that the CTAC has already put forth in other funding opportunities. So for instance, currently today, CTAC for after school programming requires that the programs implement, serve children with creative and enriching programming. Programming is offered 4 days a week with at least an hour and a half of programming throughout the day, throughout the whole school year. Employs highly qualified staff. Sites are safe and enriching and have an active or exempt DCF license. Each program has a trained person in first aid and infant CPR. Also have staff ratios of 1:20, with all of the staff having background screenings. Programs have a program director who's responsible for managing the program and coordinating those services, and also serve low-income children in Alachua County. So as you think about your capacity building plans, and I'm going to go over all of the details on how you build one, but keep these kind of minimum requirements in mind, because if you don't have, if you currently as an organization say can't reach those minimum requirements, this is a place where we want you to strive towards, and this is a key part of this funding, is to help you meet those requirements and giving the funding and flexibility to do that, right? So that, again, as the system gets stronger. For summer, the programming requirements are a little bit less. Still, implement creative programming. Still, programming is offered to meet the needs of children and family during summer. Still, qualified staff. safe sites, still the CPR training, staff ratios of 1 to 20, and background checks. So all of the same things typically we see for summer programs. Now I'm going to go in detail the minimum requirements to bid for the solicitation. I'm going to go through these one by one, and please stop me if you have any questions, and I'm going to go through them. So because this is a key part of this solicitation is the list for the minimum requirements to bid. So in order to apply for this funding, one, provider must be qualified to conduct business in the state of Florida, must not be at Alachua County Public School or charter school approved by any public school system in the state of Florida. You must have been a part of the collaborative, applied and accepted into Youth Development Capacity Building Collaborative in October. You must have completed the baseline survey that was included in your welcome email for the Youth Development Capacity Building Collaborative. And you must have completed the following trainings. October 13th, Youth Development Collaborative and Doing Business with the Trust. It is not required that you have completed that. The Florida After School Network training was required for everyone. October 20th, Early Learning Coalition School Readiness Training was only required for providers serving elementary age students. October 27th, DCF licensing was only required for providers serving elementary age children in after school and do not have an active DCF license or exemption. The November 4th training, which is the second part of after school, the Florida After School Network training, was not required but recommended. I'm going to stop here if there's any questions about this. See any questions? Nope. Okay. In addition to the ones I just went over, these are providers must have offered a summer program either in 2019, 2020, 2021. So in the past 3 summers, you must have done some sort of summer programming, or must have offered an after school program in 1920, 2021, or in this current school year. So that's the additional requirement. Now for number 7, you must meet the definition for what CTAC defines as an out of school time program. 1 is implement creative programming that meets the needs and interests of children enrolled in your programming, including things like academic programs, specialty programs, multi-purpose program with an array of activities. Your programming has no restriction as long as your programming meets the needs of the children enrolled in your out of school time program. You must operate in a physical environment that is adequately and safely accommodates all your program activities. You must offer ongoing in-person services for after school and or summer, employ highly qualified staff, serve children between the grades of kindergarten through 12th grade. There's no requirement that you serve all those grades, just somewhere along those grades. You typically will serve the same children on an ongoing basis. So typically multiple days per week, you'll see the same group of children. As a provider, you're responsible for the supervision of children while providing services, and not primarily serve children on a one-on-one basis. And additionally, not be an enhancement provider that provides add-on services or push-in services to another program. I'm going to stop here and ask you if there are any questions on the minimum requirements to bid. This is specifically for this ITN. Questions? Nope. Okay, moving on. Okay, so for this ITN, the terms of services, approved awards will be granted funding for capacity building plans to be implemented in 2022 with contracts between January and August of 2022. Successful applicants will be paid a fee for service based on the deliverables established in their capacity building plans. Now the timeline for all of this. So yesterday, the solicitation was released and began the cone of silence. The cone of silence means that all questions and answers must go through the formal question and answer process. And so no communication related to this ITN can happen between trust staff or board members, so that all fairness in this solicitation takes place. So we are now currently under the cone of silence. So now all questions must go through the Q&A process. Today, thank you for being here. We're having the bidders conference. To answer, the last day to ask questions will be on November 16th at 2 p.m. You should see all of your final responses to posted on the bid website on November 18th. And the submission deadline is November 19th, Friday, November 19th at 6 p.m. The application review period will be November 20th through November 30th. Since this is an ITN, there will possibly be applicant interviews, and those applicant interviews will take place between December 1st and December 3rd. The public evaluation of applications will take place on Friday, December 3rd at 4 p.m. Funding recommendations will happen on December 6th, and that will end the cone of silence. And the board meeting where these recommendations go to the board for their approval is December 13th. If there are any appeals needed, this will be on starting December 14th, and contract negotiations will start December 15th. Any questions about the timeline? Nope. Okay. Okay, so capacity building plans. Again, the whole point of this ITN is capacity building plan. So what does the scope of service going to look like under this ITN? So for the scope of services, organizations are expected to build their organization, to build a capacity plan to meet or exceed those after school or summer minimum requirements, and focus on the following categories: administration and organization, program management and staff, communication and interaction, program structure and activities, health, safety, nutrition, program environment, family and community involvement, and system building. These are the standards from the Florida After School Network. So your scope of services is to develop your own capacity building plan based off of those categories, and select 5 to 10 different areas to work on. And then you would create SMART goals for each of those areas, and that would go into your scope of services. So as part of the budget will be separated into 2 categories. So for the budget for this solicitation, we have a budget for indirect planning costs. So in this case, programs would be awarded 20% of their verified out-of-school time program revenues in the previous year to support capacity building. So if your budget is over $150,000, it will be capped at $30,000. If you're under $25,000, it'll be a minimum of $5,000. This gives you a lot of flexibility in helping to plan and implement your capacity building plans. And again, it will be based off of your verified program revenues. In addition to indirect planning costs, you can also apply to get direct costs. And these direct costs are to support specific activities associated with obtaining your DCF licensing or background screenings. CTAC will pay all reasonable costs, but they must be included with cost justification at the time of contracting and approved in advance by your contract manager. The providers for direct costs, you'll be compensated at a cost reimbursement basis with appropriate documentation. And you can also apply to get a 25% advance of these costs. But all the reimbursements must be trued up before additional payments are made. And if payments are in excess of the true value, the trued up value, then those funding would need to be returned to CTAC. So an example of direct costs might be, say, your application fee to get your DCF license. So you could include that cost in here and say, I need this application fee to be covered by CTAC. That is a reasonable, justifiable cost to CTAC, and that would get approved as part of your direct costs. So those are the 2 kind of buckets of funding that is available. Your indirect planning cost, which is very flexible, and that is intended to be a percentage of your organizational budget, essentially, from the last year. And your direct costs are all the reasonable costs associated with obtaining your licensing or background screenings and things of that nature. So as part of this solicitation, the eligible funding uses, you must be used for eligible expenses between January 2022 and August 2022. Direct cost activities related to DCF screenings. You can use them to purchase supplies and materials to improve safety and wellness of program activities, account for staff time spent planning, developing, and completing these strategies, software and technology items that don't individually cost over $1,000. There are some funding restrictions. You can't use the funding to purchase capital equipment, which is anything over $1,000 or more than a life expectancy. Revenue replacement or revenue losses, duplicated expenses that are already covered in known grants or contracts. And you could also not use this for real property. So you can't purchase a building with the funding. Program timeline. So based on if awarded capacity building funding, you can expect the program to start in January with an approved capacity building plan. You can expect monthly provider meetings. You can expect to report on your monthly progress and also submit monthly invoices. In addition, at the end of the program, you'll be expected to complete an end of program narrative and a post self-assessment. So thinking about all these things, the evaluation criteria for all applications submitted based on this timeline include 2 areas: organizational eligibility, meeting those minimum requirements to bid, the capacity building plans, submitting all the forms, and completed a satisfactory capacity building plan and budget. If you meet those 2 areas, then you'll be recommended for funding. If you don't, you will be not recommended for funding. It's a very simple review process. Okay, so the review process, how it works is, again, all of the Q&A will be posted on the website. It's been released as of yesterday, the ITN. Proposals are due on November 19th at 6 p.m. Late proposals will not be accepted. And there may be interviews or site visits to confirm the applicant meets all the requirements to bid and to negotiate terms of the capacity building plans. The executive director of CTAC develops the recommendations that go to the board and are publicly noticed meetings. Applicants are encouraged to attend those publicly noticed meetings, and any decision and awards will be posted onto the website as well. The CTAC reserves a right to reject any and all submittals, request clarification, waive any informalities or any irregularities, enter into any contract, not enter into any contract, not select any firm, cancel the process at any time, amend this process, interview prior to award, enter negotiations, award more than 1 contract if it's in the best interest of CTAC, and issue similar solicitations in the future. And always, as always, request additional information. All right. In addition to that, there is a negotiation process that, as this is an ITN, there could mean asking you to revise some goals or deliverables, selecting more challenging standards to accomplish the goals, meet more higher standards, and negotiating estimated costs and funding amounts. All right, the Q&A process. If you have any questions, today we'll answer all your questions on this if you're live here. But after today, all questions will need to go through the submission question process, which is on this link under the solicitation. So please submit it through that link so that all questions go through that process. All right. At this point, I just want to stop and see, are there any questions before I start going into the application process and the application materials? Okay, no questions? Okay, dokie. So application process. So what does it take to apply? Well, in order to apply for this ITN, you have to complete Form 1, which is the prospective contractor certification, Form 2, which is organizational information, Form 3, which is the capacity building self-assessment tool, Form 4, which is your capacity building plan and budget. And I'm going to go through all of these in detail. Additional documents, you will also have to show proof of corporate status or legal address, proof of your out of school time revenue from the most recent fiscal year, such as your tax documents, IRS 990, audited financial statements, balance sheets, philanthropy hubs profiles, etc. Because that is a key part of verifying your 20% as part of the planning costs. So please submit those documents as part of your application, and a copy of your IRS 501c3 letter if applicable. All these materials will be submitted via email to the procurement email address listed here and in the solicitation. And they should all be attached in one single email. All right, now let me go through the application materials. So
Anna, there's one question that came through the chat from Pam L. Pam, would you like to unmute yourself so that you can ask your question directly?
Yes, sorry, I'm on my phone. It's a little hard. My audio's a little going in and out, but is this only for current after school programs, what we're talking about now? This is not the summer funding, correct?
this is funding for capacity building for out of school time providers.
Oh, okay.
This is not program funding for either after school or summer. This is capacity building funding specifically. And all the minimum requirements. You can be a summer only provider and apply for this as well, but pay special attention to the minimum requirements to bid. This is not this is not programmatic funding at all. This is capacity funding.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, so in the application, the first form is your prospective contractor certification form. I'm just showing it to you. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just as an example, it's just a legal document to fill out. Form number 2 is your organizational information, and this includes your name, contact information, and a certification that you meet all of the minimum requirements to bid, and including supporting narrative of how you meet those minimum requirements. If we need to reserve the right to verify additional information and or request additional documentation. But form 2 is very important in making sure that you meet the minimum requirements to bid. Form 3, which is your organizational capacity self-assessment tool. So for many of you who went to the training with the Florida After School Network, this is the same tool that you've been using through the Florida After School Network trainings. In this case, we just want you to complete a full self-assessment throughout the entire document. And what you would do is rate yourself on each of those areas. And in the self-assessment, it also tells you what funding type the quality standard is associated with. As I mentioned before, this solicitation has the opportunity for 2 funding categories, which is indirect planning costs, and the other one is direct costs, which you have to include cost justifications for. But this particular self-assessment is really just for you and your organization to submit to us so that we have a standard to see where you're currently starting. We are not judging you on your self-assessment as part of the solicitation process. This is purely for you so that you can submit your goals appropriately so we know where you want to go as part of your goals as for the capacity building plan. Again, all these forms are on the website. So you would just download them from here and complete them. This is form 3, which is the organizational capacity self-assessment. As part of the self-assessment, you would rate yourself on these different levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is details that we covered in the Florida After School Network training. We recommend you work on your prioritizing areas where you rated yourself a 3 or lower. And here's an example of a full capacity building plan, a self-assessment filled out, where you have the quality standard, you have the elements here, and evidence to support the rating. The evidence to support the rating is just notes for you to see how you document this so that if you're awarded this funding, you'll do a post assessment. So you'll have a way to see, oh, how have I changed since then? So that you'll have jog your memory. And additionally, we'll use this, those especially that are best practices for the system as examples on how to support, say, the level 5s across the system too. So this is what the capacity building self-assessment tool looks like if you completed it all the way through. After you complete your self-assessment, which is Form 3, you will start to identify 5 to 10 quality standards that you scored a level 3 or lower on to prioritize your capacity building plan. In part of your, this will determine your scope of work and an action plan. We recommend that you focus on areas where you scored a 3 or lower and supports your ability to meet or exceed the minimum requirements for after school or summer programming, which is the ones I mentioned earlier in the slides. So they should kind of align with what your organization wants to do, and at the same time, helping to support your ability to meet or exceed those minimum requirements. The funding will be based directly on your goals and capacity building plan, and you should choose quality standards that justify the amount allocated. So, things that make the most sense from you as an organization, and at the same time, those that make the most sense for requesting funding for. As you think through which are the 5 to 10 areas that you want to improve, again, I have this little diagram to make sure you kind of focus on thinking about what are things I must do. Again, that might be things that might be background checks. I need to do background checks. I must do background checks, right? Versus what you want to do. There's so many things that I know providers who out of school time providers are always such overachievers and things like that, but thinking about all the things you want to do and how you want to grow your programs, and also what you can do, especially thinking about the timeline and the availability of funding. Okay, so try to make it in a place where you are a happy must do, can do, want to do, and prioritize those 5 to 10 areas. Once you identify those standards that you want to help improve, you will create SMART goals for each of those areas. A SMART goal is an acronym that means specific. So you have to consider who, what, when, where, and why. It's very measurable. You'll know how you'll determine if you met the goal. It's achievable and attainable. It's something that you can do also specifically in a reasonable amount of time. It's relevant to your organization, to your mission, and to this ITN, and it's time bound. So we know exactly when you expect to finish it, right? So that was all the goals that are associated with this should be in a SMART goal format. Here's an example of a SMART goal for those who aren't familiar. By March 2022, ABC organization will identify what improvements are needed in order to obtain DCF licensing at all of our 3 sites that serve elementary school children. ABC organization will work to implement these changes before June 2022 in preparation for summer programming. And by August 2022, all changes will be incorporated and DCF licensing will be obtained to provide quality program to children in our program. This is an example of specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant and time-bound SMART goal. So something to keep in mind as you build your own goals. All right, now Form 4 is, again, Form 3 is your self-assessment where you identify and do the whole thing across all of the different standards that are put forth. Form 4 is where you put which are the ones you want to include in your scope of work and request funding for. Okay, so this is your capacity building plan and budget. I have an example of one here that I'm going to pull up on my screen. So this capacity building plan and budget, you'll include your name, you include your program revenues. Again, this program revenue area is used to determine how much indirect planning dollars you can receive, as well as that additional documentation to verify it. In this case, my program has program revenues of $150,000, so they could receive up to $30,000. And I also include their program expenses for the year. In my example here, we have on here on Form 4, there's 2 areas. One is your quality standards with a direct known cost, and down below in yellow, which are the standards in indirect planning costs. These will be noted with IDC and IP on your self-assessment. And we also included the list here so you can see which are the ones where you can ask for either category of funding. So for direct costs, a lot of them have to do with documentation and compliance with background checks, CPR, DCF licensing, memberships, and insurance. So all of these go into this category, and you just select it from the drop-down list here, which one you want to work on. My organization sample has decided to work on DCF licensing. They have a SMART goal associated with it. They have deliverables on how they would document this particular task, who would in their organization would lead it, when they expect to complete it by. And in the case of direct costs, this is incredibly important for direct costs. You must also estimate the costs and could include a cost justification. So what costs, what part of DCF licensing do I want covered? And how did I estimate that amount? So in this case, I estimated I needed $4,600. And this case, my justification was $100 for application fees, $500 for inspection, some additional staff training, and I also needed to make some safety improvements to the site. And this is very specific to your organization, as we learned through the DCF licensing training. So you're going to have to do the homework and decide in advance what are some of the areas we think we are going to need to cover, especially when it comes to your DCF licensing and things like that. So because it's so specific to your organization, we left it open-ended for you, but you do need to justify it and include estimates in advance as part of this scope of work. For the costs that are standards that are indirect, you don't have to justify any costs for them. Those would just be given to you as an equal split of your $30,000 in this case, based on how many you have. So in this case, $5,000 per indirect planning standard, because I have 6 of them. Any questions about the capacity building plan and the budget side? This is probably where I think most of the questions you might have in filling it out, but this is where you would put your 5 to 10 goals, the standards that you decide to pick, your SMART goals, and again, any costs associated with them. And this would also turn into your scope of services if approved.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. So just to be clear, okay, now I understand. This is the cost, our estimated cost through our goals, what we're estimating it may cost, and we can put that in there, correct? So like DCF, because if we're a summer program, the changes really wouldn't be implemented until closer to summer. And it wouldn't have to be done right this minute, correct?
No, I mean, the timeline, as you can see in the contract terms, are January through August, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but you your scope of, you're determining your goals, right? So be like, okay, so say if you wanted to work on the quality standard, which is say DCF licensing, there are a lot of steps in requiring getting your DCF licensing, right? And again, lots of organizations start at different points, right? So if you need to get your DCF licensing, you might already have your director credential, you might already have a lot of things, or you might not, right? So for your particular organization, you would have to kind of look through what are all the kind of requirements, where does my organization fit in currently today, and what are some of the things cost-wise I could reasonably expect to incur, right? And then estimate those. And those costs, again, these are what we call direct costs, and those direct costs will be reimbursed to you. These are cost reimbursement ones, but you can apply for an advance on those costs of 25%. The other costs, the other areas of your budget are solely based off of your program revenue, 20% of your program revenue from the year before, capped to 20% to $30,000, and you're going to be paid per deliverable. So as soon as you meet that kind of goal based off of your own definition, you can get paid for that.
So like if one of the goals is expansion, right? Let's say we want to add high school.
Mhm.
And so we would have to expand, we would have to rent more rooms and hire more staff. Would that be under the goal section? It wouldn't be a direct reimbursement.
So you'd have to find it under like, what's the related quality standard, right? So what's the
Okay.
quality standard that makes most sense? It's probably going to be around the programming, right, areas. And then your goal might be to say, oh, in this case, my goal will be to increase. The only direct cost ones we have associated with it are these ones, which are very related to
Oh, okay.
licensing and things like that. Everything else is a planning cost, essentially.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Very helpful.
And again, that planning cost is very flexible. Anyone else have questions? No questions. All right. So that is Form 4, which is your capacity building plan and budget. I went over all this fun stuff with you already. Okay. So if you are interested in applying for this, all you'd have to go is go to the website and find all the great forms I just went over with you. And that is it. Here's a checklist of what you would need to apply, which is Form 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as those additional attachments I went over, including your legal status, those fiscal documents, which are tax, audited financial statements, balance sheets, things of that nature that show proof of your program revenues. And then submit before the deadline to the procurement email address listed in here. That is it. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So what if you're not in the philanthropy hub?
You
You have
not,
to-
it's not a requirement in this solicitation to be in the philanthropy hub.
Can you go back to 45?
Sure. Yeah. So in this case, you're talking about this one. This is proof of out of school time revenue.
Additional requirements for submission. When it says copy of RS 501c3 a determination of applicable. So that doesn't matter. And then the one that says philanthropy, above that one. The revenue must cost fiscal year such as tax documentation.
You just need to show proof of your most recent program revenue.
Okay.
Philanthropy is an example of how you could do that.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
And also IRS 990 is an example of how you could do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Again, the reason why we're asking for your program revenue is because the calculation for indirect planning costs is 20% of your program revenue, capped to $30,000. So if you have a program revenues of $150,000, then you can get $30,000 of indirect planning costs.
And this PowerPoint will be on the website.
What do you guys think? I think the answer might be yes. It'll all be here under the solicitation.
Okay.
So if you go to, just so I can remind everybody, so you go to the Children's Trust of Alachua County's website, this is all under the, it's being a little slow for me. There we go. So if you go to this website and you go to the bids and RFPs, this is already posted. And it's the ITN 2021-1 Youth Development Capacity Building. You click on this. This is your place to find all of the postings, slides, recordings, as well as all the application materials.
So the recording as well as this PowerPoint, as Anna just stated, can be found there.
As well as the detailed ITN. The ITN has all this details as well that I went over with you today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And just as a reminder, the deadline is Friday, November 19th at 6 p.m.
And Dion just dropped the link to that solicitation page, Dion. Is that what that was? Okay, he just dropped the link in the chat. If anybody wants to grab that.
Perfect. Are there any other questions? I don't hear any, but you might think of some. So feel free to, if you have future questions, again, all the questions are now under the cone of silence. So all your questions will need to be posted here as well. So if you want to post ask a written question, then go through this form and your answers will be posted on the website.
All
If
right.
not, happy applications, everybody. It's very exciting to see this opportunity. And so we hope this will help support all of your organizations as well.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Mm.
Christy, did you stop the recording?
Not yet.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
Sure.